Sometimes you just have a really great idea for a game, and it all comes together really quickly. And this shows how important having a good idea can be. In this video, I want to dive into the design of a game that developed just like that. The latest release for Postmark Games, 52 Duels, designed by myself and Rory Muldoon. I'll go over the inspiration for the game, how the idea came to be, and how we developed it from that initial idea to become the game it is today. Hi, I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm a full-time board game designer based in Australia, and to date I've made over 60 games that have been published all around the world. On this channel I like to talk about all things game design, from my experiences in the industry to tips and tricks that can help you as a game designer. The story begins with 52 Realms Adventures, which was the previous design that we released under Postmark Games. It was the first game we made that used a deck of traditional playing cards, and it's an idea that we'd wanted to do for a very long time. I recently made a video all about the design of 52 Realms Adventures, which I'll link to here, and that's a really good preamble for the story that I'm going to tell here about 52 Duels. After we made 52 Realms Adventures, we didn't necessarily think we were going to make another playing card game so quickly. We had always had in our mind that we had this IP of ours, 52 Realms, which was going to be able to support multiple games that we use playing cards, and if we made more playing card games, then we would try and fit them into that same 52 Realms world if possible. Rory had done such an amazing job of bringing that world to life and populating it with these amazing characters, and the style that he chose to match the look of traditional playing cards. It was such an amazing asset that we wanted to be able to keep using that would make these games feel cohesive and part of a shared world. We hadn't really done that before at Postmark. All of our previous games had been standalone types of experiences, which didn't overlap in terms of their setting or themes. But this felt like a good chance to potentially start establishing that IP with a range of different games. So yes, we didn't necessarily plan on the next game being another 52 Realms game, but in this instance it was a case of just a really good idea coming along at the right time and a game really kind of falling into our laps. I've talked on this channel a lot of times about the importance of ideas in the game design process, and that the often repeated advice is that ideas are worth nothing. But if anything, this process really underlines my contrarian view to that, which is that some ideas are really, really valuable because they're so good as ideas, they're so close to a finished product, that their value is that you've got so far along the game development pathway before you've even started because the idea is just so good. As I'll go into this video, it's not always just because of the idea. Sometimes that idea fits into a style of game, that you can borrow elements from other games that already exist that help you get a better starting point for your initial design, which can mean that everything can come together much more quickly. I've been looking over the old prototype files for the game, and to underline just how quickly it came together, really there were only 4 main versions of a prototype file before we got to something that was basically the end point in terms of the core design of the game. After that, of course, there was additional artwork development and some development on the actual abilities, but it only took 4 versions to get to a pretty final version. And all that happened within the space of about 3 weeks. So sometimes things do just come together really quickly. So what was the core idea that inspired 52 Duels? It was essentially what I call a mashup. And what I like about mashups often is that it's a way to take existing games or genres or themes and combine them in new and different ways, where you produce a new game or a new product that feels fresh, but it can borrow elements from those 2 or 3 things that you've mashed up together. I find it can be a really great method to generate new ideas, to explore new themes or mechanisms, or to give you a good way to reinterpret existing mechanisms or existing themes in a fresh way. And so for 52 Duels, it was really simple. It was basically dice thrown, but with playing cards. For those who don't know, Dice Thrown is a 2-player dueling game, which is based loosely on the mechanics of Yahtzee. Each player has a set of dice, and they have a character sheet which has different abilities on it. And those different abilities require different combinations of dice results to be activated for you able to use and damage your opponent. And like any good dueling game, you're trying to reduce your opponent to 0 HP in order to win the duel. And on your turn, you get to roll your dice, keep some, re-roll the other dice, and hopefully you're going to combine them in a way to use your abilities effectively. And there are a lot of other details. There are some ability cards, there are different ways to level up abilities, a lot of the characters have specific status effects which can change the way you play, but at its core it's effectively dueling Yahtzee with special abilities. And my idea was simply to take that same model and apply it to playing cards. And much like Dice Throne being based on Yahtzee, you could imagine that our game, 52 Duels, could be loosely based on poker hands, which is that equivalent of combinatorial space when it comes to a playing card deck. How can you combine different playing cards in different patterns to produce certain results? In a way, the reason why this idea was so good is that that model fitted so well with the mashup potential. You already had an idea of how Dice Throne works in terms of it being a dueling game, that you can have these different abilities that are triggered by the dice, and playing cards just slot so well into that existing model. And just like Yahtzee lent something well to Dice Throne, the playing cards and poker hands could immediately be ported into this new 52 Duels prototype. And it worked really seamlessly even from the start. In fact, if I show you the very first prototype of 52 Duels, which I'll put up on the screen now, you can actually see that a lot of the elements of the game were already here right from the start. Along the bottom, you can see the abilities, pretty much in the same position as they are on the final sheet now. We had abilities that were triggered by having cards of the same suit, the same rank, or a run. That all exists in the current game. It pretty much is unchanged. In fact, this is the sheet for the Barbarian, and you can see that the abilities for same suit and same rank are very similar to what they were in the final version. We also had the idea of a full house, which I'd randomly put on the side of the sheet because I couldn't fit it along the bottom. I wanted the idea for some of the abilities to be able to scale up based on the number of cards you'd played them. This is the same in Dice Throne. Some of the abilities scale up based on how many dice you play to them. And once you have that idea, actually there aren't that many different styles of poke hand that you can make, and same suit, same rank, run, full house are pretty much it actually, without getting to much more restrictive hands like straight flushes or something like that. You can't see it here, but from the very start we had this idea of the deck being your life, the idea being that when you take damage you would discard cards from the top of your deck and put them in your wounds pile. And that was a place where it was much harder to get cards back into your deck, and when you ran out of cards in your deck and you had to take wounds, you would die. Whereas if you use cards for abilities, they would just go into your discard pile after they're used, and if you had to reform your deck, you would shuffle your discard pile and remake your deck. So cards could go into these two different places. Discards was much easier to get back into the game, whereas wounds were effectively removed from your deck. And that was present from the very start of the game. We were lucky enough that not only the mashup allowed us to get a really good start for the game, there were a lot of other key decisions right from the start, which was somewhat natural because I'd seen them done in other types of games. And having a deck as a version of your life points had been done in a number of other games. I think some of John Cloudis's small box games has used this kind of mechanism. Definitely in Summon Awards, you have a little bit of an idea of your deck being a resource that's going to run out over time, and once you run out of the cards, you're dead. So that kind of thing had appeared in a lot of games and was easy to port into this game as well. We have the items from the very start, which is this idea that you can always discard a card to use it as a specific item based on the suit of the card that you discarded. And this is taken straight from 52 Realms Adventures. And while the effects are different, the idea of that versatility and having a few core actions always available to the players based on the cards in their hand was fit really well in this game as well. You can see on the right of this first prototype there's a section called Defend, and this is also present in the final game, very similar to how it was in the very first prototype. The idea being is when you're attacked by your opponent, you have a chance to potentially defend against that damage by revealing certain cards from your hand. And this was again taken pretty much straight from Dice Throne. In Dice Throne you also have this ability to roll dice in response to being attacked. This is like a defense roll, and you have the opportunity of potentially defending against some of that damage and preventing it. And the final thing that we had right from the start of the game, which definitely helped it be developed rather quickly, was that the core turn structure that I sort of started with ended up working really well, and that was the idea of having 5 cards in hand at the start of your turn and having 2 actions per turn, with actions being either playing cards to abilities or using items. This is something I've used in some of my own games. 5 cards in hand is almost a standard that's been adopted by a lot of deck building games and card games. Dominion, for instance, uses it to great effect. And so it's always a good place to start. It tends to give you the right mix of combinations and possibilities while not being overwhelmed by having too many cards and too many possibilities. I feel like I could make a whole video about how many actions you give a player to do on their turn, and 2 always feels like such a great number. And I think I was especially influenced by someone like Bruno Cathala in this regard, especially because he uses 2 actions per turn in a lot of his 2-player games, which 52 Duels was going to be. If you only have 1 action per turn, the game can become very reactive, or in fact repetitive. I could do one thing, then you can do one thing to counter exactly what I've done, and then I can do one thing to counter exactly what you've done, or I can do 1 action, you can take 1 action to effectively undo what I've done, back and forth, and either the game becomes very repetitive or you don't even have any progress at all. When you go to 2 actions, immediately that decision space opens up, and allows us a player on a single turn to pull off some combos and some strategy that their opponent can't necessarily react to immediately. I can do one smaller action to set up for a much bigger and powerful second action all on my turn before my opponent gets to do something to disrupt me. 2 action turns gives players a better sense of fulfillment and reward from their turns, because often on most of the turns they can get something useful done. Maybe they don't have enough to do in one action that would feel meaningful, but if you have 2 actions, normally you're able to get something done that's worthwhile, and that can help the game move forward and give a positive feeling to players as they play. It's also not too many actions, so the turns are still quick. So there are a lot of things that we got right from the start, and again, sometimes you do just get lucky in game design. Lucky is one word for it. A lot of it is sometimes about building on games that have already come before, and the types of decisions they've made in their game design that you can just borrow to give you a head start on your new game design. And that's definitely true what happened in 52 Duels. But we didn't get everything right at the start, and there were a few things that changed which I think definitely improved the game over the next subsequent versions. One thing I haven't noticed in this first prototype was this chance box in the bottom right hand corner. And this was this idea a little bit from Yahtzee, where if you had some cards which you couldn't really do much with, this chance box was basically a place where you could play any cards, and over time, if you played enough cards there, they would do something. I thought that the game probably needed some backup in the case of getting really unlucky, if you had really bad cards in your hand, that you could still do something on your turn. I think my reasoning of needing this aspect was important, it's just the execution wasn't particularly interesting. And already in the second version, this was the main thing that had changed, and I changed it this idea of leveling, which is already close to what it ended up being in the final game. And the idea with leveling is that you would improve permanently over the course of the game. It would give a better sense of arc to the game, because in the very first prototype, you would build up cards on abilities, and then you would use those abilities, but then you would be back to where you were before. There wasn't a sense of anything changing, or a sense of you even getting more powerful as the game went on, and that's always a nice thing to be able to give to players if possible, especially in a dueling game where you want to feel like you're getting more and more powerful as you play. So leveling up, effectively getting better and getting more abilities as you play the game, and that those abilities can't be taken away from you and you always have them once you've unlocked them, was a fun way to give that sense of progression in the game. The way that leveling worked initially was the idea that you had to play cards in a set sequence. You had to start by playing a single ace, and then a single 2, and then a single 3, and so on and so forth. And once you got to certain breakpoints, like when you got to 4, you would unlock the first level of your abilities. When you got to 8, you would unlock the second ability, and when you got to King, when you'd done the whole run, you would get all your abilities. There are a couple of problems with how this was implemented, however. It was extremely restrictive. It could be that you just didn't draw any aces early on, and you needed an ace to start the ability. And this is something I see in other designers' prototypes quite often. There's too much restriction in how players can access doing a certain part of the game. And this is usually the case in a game which has random inputs, such as this game where you shuffle a deck and get a hand of random cards. The fact that I was basically requiring a player to have an ace to be able to even interact with this part of the game was a problem, because if you didn't draw any aces, then you just couldn't level up. So if you ever have a game where you have random inputs, or maybe you're getting resources, and if you don't have this particular resource, you can't start to do this part of the game, it might be a good idea to rethink that into a way that, how could I make sure that players can access all parts of the game from the start, and it's not reliant on them getting lucky? Or put another way, consider the most unlucky case that you could get when you're drawing cards from a deck or rolling dice. And if you get really unlucky, does that mean you can't play parts of the game? If true, then something needs to change. The other problem with this initial way of doing leveling was that you only got to play one card per action, so it was actually very inefficient to level up. To level up to get to the first level, where you needed 4 cards, would take you 2 full turns, 4 actions in total. And that was simply too many actions. It was much more powerful just to play cards to abilities and use them, rather than waste time trying to level up for some minimal benefit. And so it did have to change 52 Duels as well. The leveling did change, and this is the 4th version, which you can start seeing leveling as it is in the final game. This idea that you could play any number of cards to leveling with 1 action, and that you would check to see whether the total number of ranks of the cards played there would get to certain thresholds. And once you got to that threshold, you would turn all those cards face down, you've unlocked the level, but then you would have to start again, building up for the next level. And so with this new version of leveling, because you could play any number of cards in one go, it was possible sometimes to level up in a single action. And that felt a lot better in terms of being more efficient and worthwhile in terms of leveling as compared to doing other things in the game. Of course, when you get to the second and third level, you need higher totals, so it's harder to do that in one turn. And that felt right because it felt that in a lot of games you might easily unlock the first level and maybe the second level, but you wouldn't necessarily level up fully in every game. And having that variety from play to play, I think, is the right way to go. If players always feel like they have to level up in every game, then that's what they're going to do to start the game, and it's not very interesting. So you might think there's not much else to say about the design of 52 Duels. I got lucky with a really great idea to start with. I borrowed some mechanisms from other games and starting points for number of cards and actions on a turn, and it all just happens to work really well, and that is true. We were really fortunate, and of all my recent designs, maybe in the past 5 years, and certainly of all the Postmark games, this was the one that was developed in the easiest way and came together in the shortest amount of time. But there's still a few interesting things I want to talk about with the design, and the first is I want to talk about emergent gameplay. I've probably mentioned it on some other videos, but the idea of emergent gameplay, especially when you're designing a game, is when aspects of the game or how things interact in the game emerge from the play of the game that you didn't necessarily intend when you designed the game, or if you're buying a game, when you read the rules, you might not actually understand what's going to happen when you play the game from those rules. It's something that you can only see when you start playing the game. It emerges out of the gameplay. And there's some really interesting things that happen with 52 Duels, which I wish I could claim were intentional design decisions. But if I'm honest, we were actually really lucky and fortunate that these really interesting aspects of the design actually came out of the play without us even intending them to be there. The first is how the level up system gives a really interesting sense of tension in the game. When I was designing the leveling system and this idea of having different levels, I needed a way to be able to mark which levels you had achieved. And I had the idea basically of when you achieved a level, you would simply just turn the stack of cards that you used there, put them face down, and then you would put them where the first level is, and then that shows that you've unlocked the first level. We didn't want to have to use other markers or anything like that. That was what drove that decision. It was purely ergonomics. We needed a way to mark that you'd already unlocked a level, and so we needed to leave the cards there, and putting them face down seemed like a great solution at the time. But what we didn't realize is that solution led to some really interesting gameplay consequences. As you level up, of course, you're getting more powerful, so you're able to get more done, your abilities are more efficient or more powerful, and that gives a great arc to the game. But the nice thing is actually there's a downside to it as well, because as you lock cards away in your level up area, you're effectively reducing the overall size of your deck. And because the size of your deck is effectively your life, and when you run out of cards you die, as you level up, you're actually making it more risky for yourself because you're getting closer and closer to death because you're removing cards from circulation. And it actually leads to a really fun tension as the game goes on, especially as you level to level 2 or level 3, you feel really powerful, but actually you're really just on the edge of losing because you've also hamstrung yourself because you have fewer cards in your deck, you're easier to kill. And that rubber banding between getting more powerful from leveling up, but also getting weaker because there's fewer cards in your deck, works really well and completely unintentionally. As I said, we designed the leveling system and locking cards away purely for ergonomic reasons to start with, but it had a really nice consequence in terms of giving that nice sense of rising tension of being more powerful, but also more at risk at the same time. Another consequence of the card flow system in the game, where cards move to your wound pile when you're damaged and it's very hard to get cards back from them, is that as the game goes on, because you're cycling through your deck and those cards that you draw from your deck are what you use to activate abilities, you actually start to deck build your deck in a way. Because as you play cards to abilities, often the cards will either be there on your abilities waiting to be used, or once you use the cards and abilities, they move to your discard pile. But importantly, when they're in your discard pile, they're not in your deck. And when you get damaged and you take wounds, you take cards from your deck to put into your wound pile. So the cards you use for abilities, especially at the start of the game, tend to be the ones that you'll have throughout the whole game, because they're less likely to become wounds. They're not in the deck and they're not available to be put into the wounds pile. And what that means is, if you do a certain ability at the start of the game a lot, say you play a lot of same suit abilities at the start of the game, actually as the game goes on, you're going to slowly see that your deck is going to start becoming a lot of the same suit. And what that means is, as you have fewer and fewer cards in your deck, it actually makes it easier to activate abilities as you get to the end of the game. You don't have the same range of being able to activate all the abilities, but you tend to specialize in one or two abilities just based on how you've played the game up to that point. And the reason why this is actually a really nice consequence is it means that the game often ends on a high point. It doesn't fizzle out with this idea of, I don't have any cards and I can't do anything. It means that even when you only have a few cards in your deck, because they're so keyed into activating one particular ability, for instance, you maybe only have 5 hearts in your deck at the end of the game, but that means you can always activate your all of one suit ability very frequently and very consistently. It means you can keep doing powerful things right up to the end of the game, meaning games feel exciting right to the end rather than fizzling out. As you get experience in the game, you start to get a bit of a sense of how your deck is changing over the course of the game. Potentially you're losing cards of a certain suit or a certain rank, and that will change the way that you play cards to abilities as you go on. Perhaps if you know you're missing a particular rank, it might mean that it's not worth trying to do a run if you're missing the rank from that run. Also, different characters have different preferences for certain ranks or certain suits, and so as you play different characters, you have to be aware of different elements of your deck and potentially deck building towards different specializations that might suit your character. And that gives this sense of mastery of the game where you can actually learn this metagame about how you manage your deck on top of just working out how to use the abilities effectively. And that's a really nice thing that wasn't really intended from the game, but comes out from this deck as life system. So that was a whistle-stop tour through the design of 52 Duels. I should say that I really enjoy designing the game, and I'm really looking forward to being able to design more for it. As is with the case of all of our Postmark games, we are intending to release more and more content for the game. And for 52 Duels, that means releasing new characters in packs of 2 as we go forward. I really enjoy designing new characters for the game. You don't need too many different mechanisms to make them feel unique from each other, and there's such a fun to actually mastering how to use the different characters to the greatest effect. If you're watching this video soon after it's released, 52 Duels is currently on Kickstarter, and I'll leave a link below if you want to go and check it out and possibly back it. However, don't worry if you watch this video far after I've first published it. The game will be then available on our website, postmarkgames.com, and I'll also leave a link down below, so no matter when you watch it, you'll either be able to get the game via Kickstarter or buy it on our website. As always, if you have any questions for me about the design of 52 Duels or anything else, please leave them down in the comments below and I'll get back to you when I can. And as always, thanks very much for watching and all the best with your game designing. Bye.